Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome to the webinar. This is an ARM Treasure Data sponsored webinar, What Marketers Need to Know About Privacy Regulations. We have a wonderful featured speaker today. Heidi Shey is a principal analyst at Forrester. She's serving security and risk professional. Her research primarily focuses on data security and privacy strategies, skills development, policies, and related technology controls, and we're so excited that she's here today. I'm Micki Collart. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at ARM Treasure Data. And I wanted to run through just a few housekeeping items before we get started with the content today. We are recording this webinar. We're on the Bright Talk platform here, so you're always able to log back in and view this recording on demand. So if you have to get out today or there's something else going on, you can always come back and view the rest of the webinar online. We also have some great extra information available to you that's featured within the Bright Talk page, and that's downloadable at any time as well. And then, of course, we're going to save questions for Heidi towards the end of the webinar and get those answered for you when we're all done with the content. But at any point in time you have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the Q&A box there, and we'll get to them after the webinar. So our agenda today, I'm just going to take a really quick opportunity up front here, just about 10 minutes or so, to kind of tell you who ARM Treasure Data is, why we exist, give you sort of a primer on the product category of CDP, what is a customer data platform, and then how customer data platforms can help with data privacy. And then the majority of time we're going to hand it off to Heidi, and she's got some great information on the current privacy regulation environment, and then really how to take that environment and use it as an opportunity for customer experience. So I read just recently that we are generating about 2.5 quadrillion bytes of data every single day. And we've gotten up to that rate just within like 90% of that rate within the last couple of years. It's kind of amazing to think about that, but if you give it some thought as to the last time you made a decision and what you did to make that decision within the last couple of weeks or so, you note that you probably went online, right? You probably looked up some information through Google. You probably sent out an email to somebody asking a question, or you posted something on a social network, right? Or in a forum. And a lot of that action, a lot of that activity is being recorded now digitally. So a lot of our life, basically, are digital these days. And that transition that we've made as beings that are being recorded digitally every day, it's a huge transition for marketers to kind of catch up with. You know, back in the 80s, if you take the example here of Gavin, he used to walk into your store, he used to call you on the phone, ask about your products and services, and you would get to know him. You get to understand what his preferences were, what he liked, right? You could have a relationship face-to-face. When the internet came around in the late 90s and early 2000s, you lost Gavin for a while. He might have been lured over to the convenience of buying things online, of doing his research online, gaining a better understanding of the same products and services that you sold him, and he disappeared. And it took marketers quite a while, about a decade or so, until the 2010s, to really figure out where Gavin was. People got really, really good at tracking people like Gavin across the internet. Data aggregators got good at making sure they could collect that data, make a business of it, maybe sell you back some of that information so that you could fill in the holes around your online businesses and your offline businesses. But today we're living in a time where we get to know everything and anything about Gavin, right? We have those capabilities within our own company to track people across our web properties, to gather that information responsibly from Gavin, right? And so it's been a renaissance of sorts, right, for companies in this new digital world. And there were leaders in all of this. The digital giants that you saw here were born online. Google's, Facebook's, the Amazons of the world. Their business models depended on the ability to take a lot of data and turn it into insights. And if you think that you're competing nowadays with the next best person out there with the same products and services, it's really not true. Because if you're competing on customer experience, you're competing with these guys because they're setting the bar and the expectation for customers' experiences. And they've gotten really, really good at being able to turn all the data that they have into insight, right? They have the right technologies. They had to be built in order to drive their businesses forward. They have the right skills and knowledge. And they've been doing this now for decades. This was the original insight and opportunity for the Treasure Data founders. They really wanted to be able to move the needle on the talent that was required to fill the gap between all the data that's being collected in the world and the insight that companies need really to have a business impact with it, right? They started the first Hadoop users group in Japan with the idea of bringing new talent up. And then in 2011, they started the company Treasure Data, right, and offered a big data platform to their customers. And now with hundreds of customers actually across the globe, we have followed our customer base into the market for customer data platforms. And these are big data platforms that are basically geared towards customer applications specifically. Now like I said, we sort of followed our customers into this. We realized that hundreds of customers of ours were using big data just to understand their customers better. And they started to build applications on top of the platform. And so we helped them into this market. We helped build more application on top of a big data platform for customer service people, for marketing people, for other customer-facing teams to be able to utilize customer data, turn that into the insights that they need for daily operations. So I'm not just talking about a system that integrates data for the sake of, say, moving it into a warehouse or just creating a customer master or just pushing it to a BI tool. All of these things you can definitely do with the CDP, but it's not the CDP's main purpose. It's actually really intended to create and maintain a single view of the customer that is actionable on a daily basis. So it's ready to be used by salespeople, service representatives, marketers to address customer business and prospects issues, right? So for an example, a marketer can use a customer data platform to take that single view of the customer and segment precise groups of customers that meet a target audience, say for a campaign. And this is like one of the bigger use cases for a CDP, but marketers are using those audiences to make better decisions on how to personalize messages that have that deep profile that they can use. So they're improving their campaign engagement, they're improving their conversions overall. So now that we have kind of an idea a little about customer data platforms and what they do, given our topic today, I wanted to put the customer data platform in context of data privacy. Now, this is a complete simplification of the customer data environment that probably exists within your organization. Again, the point, the output being that you really want to drive deep customer insights to create the right actions to make good decisions, right? And so what you're going to need is that golden triangle, and you've probably seen this before, people and processes and technology to support that customer data environment. It's not just about the technology. And this is really the same context for privacy and security. So when it starts to come into the picture, you know, I see I've drawn that circle around those people, processes, and technologies just to highlight the idea again that having a privacy compliant customer data ecosystem doesn't mean that you're just deploying technology to solve your problem, right? A CDP is only one technology that you can use in your privacy and security programs, but there's other types of technologies out there like consent management systems, other compliance-specific software that'll help you build that ecosystem. And given the increasing complexity of the regulatory environment, it's going to absolutely demand that these three things are working together to enable marketers and customer-facing teams to stay compliant. So just to kind of give you an example of that, we've implemented some fail-safes on our CDP. Those things help our customers ensure that, like, say, deletion requests from customers are adhered to. We provide tools to our customers that allow them to stream web logs from their websites, right? So they can know and track through all the different pages that their customers have been to, gives them some really good insight into behaviors. But we've also given them the capability to turn those logs off for people who have asked to be forgotten, say in context of the GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation that's gone into effect in Europe. And then, you know, if they've opted out on the website, right, to not have a cookie dropped or to be tracked at all, that fail-safe comes in to make sure that none of that data actually makes it into the CDP. So while we've covered some of this for our customers to help them out and help them be compliant, they still need to put together policies and communications that allow them to collect that customer data and allow their customers to opt out or change their communication preferences. So you're all probably familiar with kind of the subscription opt-in models. There's a lot of different options potentially if you're offering your customers the ability to go and read your blog or have a subscription or a newsletter. And those represent really complex sorts of consent that needs to be managed. And in that case, we definitely do recommend that our customers take a look at consent management systems. We have standard connectors that we use with these systems that our customers have linked to the customer data platform. All of the vendors that you see are sort of best in breed, and they help marketing and customer-facing groups track their customers, that gives them access to their data, help their customers actually go and self-serve on subscription pages and that sort of thing. CDPs can take care of basic requests, but we're really good at making sure that whatever your customers send you in terms of consent, their preferences for that are modeled alongside the profiles and the single customer views that we keep, so that the actions that you take are in compliance with those customer preferences. And that's really important. And of course, the baseline for any privacy compliance program is really security, securing the data that you keep on your customers. Here at Treasure Data, we take that security very, very seriously. We take advantage of some advanced certifications like SOC 2 Type 2. really to ensure that the data that we keep for our customers is safe and protected from breaches or any sort of loss. And just in summary, I just think I wanted to drop a few thoughts on you. The point of all of this is really to gain your customers' trust. In order to stay compliant with current and upcoming privacy regulations, you really need to understand what this security and privacy ecosystem is going to look like for you and your company and your specific organization. So once you've established it, you're really going to want to ensure that your customers see the benefits from it, right? That they get transparent communications about how you collect your data, that you only use their data in ways that they've requested you to use it. And most importantly, that you give them something of value in exchange for that data. And I think this is really, really important, and where CDP, customer data platforms, really become a foundational technology because they let you understand your customer at a totally different level to understand their preferences. So when you're doing all of these things consistently, that's when you know the system is working and you're building trust. So I'll just leave you with those bits and nuggets and tips and hand this over to Heidi, who's going to take us into the world of privacy compliance and teach us a little bit more about how we can use that as an opportunity for our customers' experiences. I'll hand it over to you, Heidi. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me and inviting me to join you today. And I really love the graphic with the triangle that you had put up earlier, Micki, about people, process, technology. All too often, I see folks really just jumping straight to the technology piece of it, thinking that's the answer to all of this, when the other pieces are so important. So much of these regulations around privacy, the focus is on process, on practices.
Right.
All right. So speaking of regulation, I would imagine that folks have heard of a thing called GDPR, right? Coming out of Europe. The one thing to recognize here is that with privacy regulations around the world today, there's much, much more just beyond GDPR. So just a map to help illustrate some of this, of different countries that we at Forrester have been tracking when it comes to privacy rights and regulations around the world. Some places to take note of going forward would be countries like Brazil, Japan, India, where there are changes to regulations and laws that are coming and increasingly being styled after GDPR standards and requirements. And this is a trend that we're seeing happening more and more across the globe. And we also have, for example, CCPA in the US to address as well when we think about the regulatory side of things. And the thing to remember and recognize that in the US at least, there's also more than CCPA with California to think about. Today, there's Maine, there's Nevada that currently have some type of privacy law in the books. And then many other states have something that's in the works, or it's being developed or being talked about to varying stages of getting it across the line. So increasingly, this is something that is going to be more and more of a thing to really recognize as you're operating and doing business in the US. And one thing to note already is that today, in all 50 states, there is some type of breach notification requirement in place already. So things have been progressing over the years. And I would encourage everyone to look to GDPR, to look to CCPA as a guide, really. This is your high watermark when it comes to privacy and the kinds of practices you need to put in place, so you can be prepared for other regulations as they come along, or changes to existing regulation. And so what do these things have in common? GDPR, CCPA. I think, unlike a lot of prior regulations that we may have seen from state to state in the U.S., which tried to list out different categories of personal information, now what we're seeing is that there's a much broader definition of personal data, of what is personal information. It can include the regular things that we may have thought about typically, like before, like some type of ID number, your social security number, for example, address, those types of things. But today, it's also things like your location data, biometric data, your internet browsing history is also personal data, and things that you might be able to infer about a person and more based on that. These regulations, they also give individuals stronger protections for their personal data. For example, so now people have rights to ask companies to delete their data or to ask that they disclose what data the company has about them. And with CCPA, you could also now ask for third parties to do the same in order to satisfy these requests. There's also more protections when it comes to children's data. There's stronger rules now under GDPR. And with CCPA, it starts to go beyond what we have in the US existing for COPPA. So if someone is under the age of 16, they have to now opt in to share information. And if they're under the age of 13, a parent or a guardian has to opt in. And then also, as we see these regulations gain more steam, they're raising greater awareness of privacy risks as well as privacy rights. So you have a greater focus on things like notice and transparency as well as consent. And with CCPA, it's demanding disclosure and keeping your privacy policies up to date as well. And really, you have to clearly state if you're going to be selling data. And of course, there's also penalties for noncompliance for both of these. And that's something interesting to take note of as well, especially with GDPR and the enforcement trends that we have started to see, where breaches, security breaches, data breaches, these are just a starting point for regulators to start to pay more attention to a company. And what we've seen so far is that data governance failures are the things that are triggering the most fines and penalties at this point. Things like insufficient legal basis for processing, or having your technology or your technical or your organizational measures for ensuring information security just not where they should be. These are the things that have been triggering different types of penalties. And then it's also about impact, not necessarily volume. So even the data of one single customer, this matters a lot. There was an example in Germany with a hospital where they mishandled the data for one patient, and this was something that resulted in a fine of 105,000 euros. And so what this means is that we think that going forward, an organization's failure to meet individuals' rights is going to really lead to this next wave of penalties. And what that means is that data governance is going to matter a lot, as well as how you fulfill your customers' rights. So with that comes questions and a focus on things like issues of data accuracy, data quality, fairness and use of that data, and how are you clearly articulating the purpose for that use, as well as looking at how you might be minimizing data collection and have good practices in place for asking people for consent and tracking that consent and preferences. And consent is, it's one of those big things here when it comes to privacy regulations. It matters a lot. It is I would say it's a core competency here. But we have to recognize that it's not the only thing that we have to think about when it comes to the practices that we put in place for protecting individuals' privacy rights. So under CCPA, there's a bunch of different rights you're going to have to fulfill for your customers. And I'll just start off by saying first, I'm not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice, but I'm here to give you a broad enough overview of some of the high-level things to think about and consider. The first being notice and disclosure. So letting people know what is it that you have collected about them or are about to collect about them. Why are you doing this? What will you do with that information? And what their rights are as consumers. It's also about access. So providing access to this person's information when they request it from you and making it in a portable, readily usable format. It's about opt-out, the right to opt out of data collection. So having that be an option for people. The right of deletion. So when someone requests that you delete their information, you do it. And you direct any service provider partners that you've shared this information with to do the same. And also non-discrimination, not discriminating against consumers who try to exercise their rights with your organization. And when we look across all of these different types of rights, it's not an easy thing to do and to fulfill, right? It's going to involve a good amount of coordination across different teams and groups within your company, as well as considerations for the customer experience and the processes that you're building and putting in place in order to take in these types of requests and fulfill them in a timely manner. And so, these new obligations, they come with new risks as well. And I'm not just talking about things like fines or penalties. There's also the risk of fulfilling these rights incorrectly. For example, let's say you send Sally's data to Jennifer. Now you have a breach on your hands. Or maybe if your processes are not in place to fulfill these correctly and to identify that this is actually the right person who's asking for this data, you might do something like inadvertently facilitate abuse, like a stalker or an abuser. They're now able to request their victim's data from your company, and you do not want that. Neither of these scenarios are events that you want to have that's tied to your brand and your reputation. Another potential risk here is when these obligations, these rights are used against you. And what I mean by that is, imagine you've got angry customers who now flood you with these types of requests to fulfill, maybe providing them access to their data or to delete their data. Or maybe you get a flood of requests after experiencing a security incident or a breach, and it's difficult to handle them all in a timely manner. And then sometimes it's not necessarily a security incident or a breach within your organization. It could be within a competitor's company or someone else who's related to your sector, because sometimes we've seen how that then triggers consumers to make requests to the companies that they do business with after they see something like this on the news. So for all of this, it really takes a team to handle different stakeholders, and it's not just IT that's in charge of this, or compliance, or security. Marketing really has to have a seat at that table in order to have your needs, your requirements, and your concerns heard in the mix. And this is especially important if you're trying to take these privacy practices to the next level. One thing that I've noticed in a lot of my customer conversations over inquiry calls is that I sometimes feel like I'm a relationship counselor of sorts, trying to hear the concerns of different teams as they struggle to work together. And oftentimes at the root of it, they're talking past each other. They're not listening to what each party here is trying to accomplish and what their intent is behind what they're doing. There's a lot of assumptions that are being made about requirements, when in reality, they're all trying to work towards the same goal. And that is privacy, and how to treat that as a customer experience opportunity. Because it really is one today. You can't really think of this just as a regulatory thing or a compliance thing. I mean, you could, but I think that's really limiting to take that view. Checkbox compliance, this is one way to approach compliance. Just doing all the things that you have to do because a regulatory requirement says you have to do it. This is not enough. I mean, you have to recognize that you can be compliant with the regulations and still fail when it comes to delivering a good customer experience. We have to recognize that regulatory requirements, these things are often bare minimum requirements. And so if compliance is the driver that's behind a lot of what you're doing here with privacy, you're going to struggle going forward as these requirements evolve. So think of it this way. You're biking, you're riding a bike on busy streets. A helmet is a good idea. It's a good practice for safety. But is it the law? We have to ask, because it's not. There's no U.S. state that requires you to wear a helmet if you're an adult. Some states still require it for riders who are under a certain age, and that is a law that exists. But also the details matter. For example, Washington State, they don't have a bicycle helmet law, but the city of Seattle, which is in Washington, has one for both adults as well as minors. So this is a bit of a parallel to thinking about privacy regulation. And in this particular case, regardless of what the law says, it's good practice to wear that helmet. And so you can think of that as you're developing your privacy practices for your company and how you go about it. Because overall, these are things where it's about doing what's right for individuals, for your customers, for respecting their privacy and handling their data with care. And in the process, done correctly, you're going to meet the different requirements you have under these privacy regulations. And then when I talk about this customer experience opportunity, what is that exactly? So you can think of it in terms of, it's almost like two tracks. One is this, how do you communicate and fulfill these customer rights? Everything from the experience that people go through as they are putting in these requests to the expectations that you're now setting and how you're communicating with people about what happens next. When can they expect to have that request fulfilled? What does that look like? On the other side, it's also about how you're building customer trust through various privacy practices and processes that are internal to your company. So this could be things like privacy by design as you're developing new procedures or maybe new products or services and how you're using data. It could also be privacy engineering. So this is a bit more involved on your, with your systems, with the technology backbone for what you're building. It's also the privacy user experience, which is a distinct and separate thing from what you might think about as user experience and design of all of that. This is more focused on the privacy aspects of it. And so with both of these, it's going to require measures that are taken internally, behind the scenes, as well as thinking through what's going to be that's visible to customers on the outside and having that all work together seamlessly. And so just a couple more things to recognize here about privacy, because you might have some folks in the organization who think, well, maybe it's dead. Maybe people don't really care about this all this much. So we might as well just do the bare minimum, meet these compliance requirements, and call it a day. That's not really the case. That's, privacy is not dead. It's not a binary thing where people either care or don't care. There are nuances to this. for people, their expectations for privacy can change across different experiences, different types of interactions. Our expectations that we have for privacy at work with our employer is going to be perhaps different from what we have from a retailer that we go buy shoes from, versus our expectations for privacy when we are, let's say, at the doctor's office. And then our desire when it comes to sharing and connecting with different social groups and people is also a fluid thing. So much of it depends on that relationship as well as the nature of the interactions that we have. And then our motivations to share information also vary widely. So let's say concerns when it comes to dry skin is something that you might share with a cosmetics salesperson. Wrinkles, everything. But this may not be something that you want to see targeted ads for. And so at Forrester, we've also done a good amount of research on what we call our privacy segmentation as well, where 4 attributes really determine a person's privacy segment. So this includes things like their willingness to share information, how aware are they when it comes to privacy and what different websites and apps are doing when it comes to collecting personal information. How comfortable is this person with this data economy and recognizing that companies are sharing and selling information about them and their online activities? And then also what protective behaviors this person might engage in, whether it's using tools that protect their privacy and their security or taking other measures to limit data collection. And with all of this within our research, we've determined that there are 5 different privacy segments to recognize here. And so each of them has their own bit of a profile about willingness to share information, how they behave online, and how they feel about privacy. And so this is the breakout for what we see within the US, within our online benchmarks of how the online population breaks out. And we've had questions about, well, is age a potential indicator of where someone might fall in this privacy segmentation? And the answer is no. Within each of these privacy segments, we see all age groups represented. So that's not really a good proxy for, I guess, privacy awareness or privacy behaviors today. It's really more about a much broader view of people's expectations and awareness about privacy, which is what I think points to how we handle privacy and personal data as an opportunity, because you'll be working with different customers who have these different expectations of you now. So to do it in a better way, to treat this as an opportunity for developing and delivering a better customer experience is going to be beneficial in the long run. Because ultimately, this is about people, right? It's about your customers, about individuals, and it's about doing the right thing to protect and respect their privacy rights. And doing this in order to both meet and exceed what's required by compliance is going to help not just sustain you over time, but better set you up for success. So you're not feeling like you're constantly trying to play catch up as these different requirements change. And with that, thank you so much for having me and allowing me to talk about privacy here today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Heidi. That was really, really insightful information. We're going to just take a quick peek here at some of the questions that we might have from folks. We actually have a comment, which I think is awesome. It says privacy is customer experience opportunity. Somebody loves that, so they just wanted to let us know. I think obviously in this context, when you're talking to marketers, it is really, really important to point out that there is a huge opportunity here, right? A huge opportunity when we get to understand our customers a little bit better. I really appreciated some of your research that you've done around some of these privacy segments. It's an interesting correlation to what we do on a daily basis is, help our customers kind of profile their customers and take a look at their preferences for things, their behaviors, their attributes, and all of that good stuff. But also to know that a part of that profile could be a privacy score, could be something that somebody else needs to be aware of in terms of their tolerance, right, for different types of communication and for being a private person who may not want to be contacted at every point that they encounter your company. So all very good stuff. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I can't take credit for all of that segmentation research. There's a bunch of different analysts at Forrester who focus on privacy within their research. So there's a good amount of collaboration that happens there.
Great. And you were able to share some blog posts with us from Forrester as well. Those are in the Bright Talk page, or will be shortly after this presentation. So we just want to do a little call out to everybody just to make sure to come check back because they've graciously given us some of their content that everybody can access to get a little bit more information. So that's great. Thank you, Heidi. It doesn't look like we have a ton of questions. I did have one little one for you, though, as you were going through your presentation. So if I could ask you just a quick one. Between all the regulations that you're seeing out there, is there some sort of baseline that you're starting to see for compliance, some similarities that you could kind of drop on us and let us know about?
Baselines. I mean, at a high level, I would say it comes back to defining your data. Now, this is something that I see many companies struggling with, because in order to even think about how you're going to start complying with these requirements, you have to know what you have. You know, what kind of data do you have, and where is it? And then being able to identify that. And that's a much larger challenge than I think a lot of people realize. And then once they start getting into it, it's, oh my gosh. And it's even after that initial practice, that process of going through and trying to define that data, now it's thinking about, well, what practices do we have in place currently for understanding that data's life cycle, thinking about issues of data governance.
Yeah. No, that's all good things to think about for sure. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions on the line here, but just again, want to give another shout out to Heidi and thank her for being here today. We really appreciate everybody's time and attention. Again, come back and check out the on-demand webinar, and we'll have some more links to some of Forrester's blogs that you can dig into. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you next time on Bright Talk for our next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.